All right, parents, I have had enough. Every single day, I have a parent sit on this blue couch while I'm taking their history, and I hear over and over again, overuse of antibiotics in the history, whether it's a younger kid coming in struggling with ear infections, respiratory infections, croup, or an older kid who's coming in struggling later with life, sensory processing, spectrum ADHD, and there's a ton of antibiotics in the history. I see it over and over again, this overuse of antibiotics. The research has been super clear for 2 decades that we are overusing antibiotics, especially in the pediatric population. Yet we continue to make this same mistake over and over again. Whether it's ear infections, respiratory, whatever it is, we're using them too much and often when we don't need to, and we're causing long-term side effects in our kiddos that are wreaking havoc on their health later in life. Parents, if you are sick of getting your kids antibiotics, you don't want to give them another round, they're stuck in this sickness cycle and it seems like you're just going over and over again for this and you can't find your way out of it, keep listening because we are talking about that today, how to get out of this cycle, how to get out of this storm, how to help your kiddo naturally and your choices besides antibiotics, and how to get down to the root of why do they need antibiotics over and over again. What is up with their system that we keep falling into this? We're going to talk about that today. So when we first talk about antibiotics, it's really important for me to stop and say, I'm not saying all antibiotics are bad. They absolutely, when they're used appropriately, save lives. So I'm not saying that. So don't hear me on that. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying that we are overusing them, especially in our pediatric population. And when we look at this, there's some really bad side effects, long-term side effects from antibiotics that can wreak havoc on our kiddos and really affect them and their development all throughout life. So when we first look at this, number one thing that long-term antibiotics does is it weakens the immune system. So when we're looking at our kids' immune system response, it's really important to recognize that 60 to 70% of that immune system is going to function out of the gut. What's the second long-term effect? Disruption of the gut and microbiome. Now, when we disrupt this gut and microbiome, yes, we're disrupting that digestion, but we're also disrupting that immune system that's supposed to be there. Antibiotics have a global effect. They don't just go to the infection. They're going to affect everywhere in the body, all of that good bacteria that we have there that's supposed to help us fight off the bad guys in the gut, help boost our immune system, help us digest our food, all that's going to get affected too. And we're going to have a disruption of absorption of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine because a large majority of these get absorbed in the gut. Serotonin and dopamine, there are nice balancing neurotransmitters. They help us to balance, to calm, all those really important things. This is getting disrupted because this is also supposed to happen in the gut. And we also have antibiotic resistance happening with a lot of conditions, which can be really, really scary too. So parents, when we look at this, we're looking at these long-term side effects. We're looking at what can happen when we overuse them. But I want to step back and say, why are we using them in the first place? What's going on that we're even using these antibiotics? And a lot of times it's ear infections, upper respiratory infections, strep, which we're not going to mess with strep. Strep is nasty. Don't mess with strep. It's sinus infections. All of these things, what do all of these conditions, what does ear infections, respiratory infections, and sinus infections all have in common? Plumbing. They are due to poor plumbing. When we don't drain things, fluid gets stuck in there. A nice fluid-filled, dark, warm cavity, that is bacteria, virus, fungals, favorite friend, right? So when we don't drain, that sets up that environment for infection to come in. I want to stop and talk about ears really, because I hear this all the time. Oh, their ear tubes are too short, they're horizontal, all this stuff. This is the mechanism behind draining the ears. It's super cool, you guys. We have this amazing design in the body that God gave us. So the ear tubes are naturally flat and closed. When the ear starts feeling full and gets to a certain pressure amount, it sends a signal to the brain and says, I need to drain. The brain sends a signal back to a muscle attached to this tube called the tensor veli palatini, cool Scrabble word for you for the day, and it says muscle flex. The muscle flexes, the ear tube opens, drains down the back of the throat, then it closes again. Guys, amazing setup. But what happens if the ear isn't telling the brain that I'm full, or the brain's not telling the muscle to flex? Ear tubes just sit closed. There's nothing to open them. They sit closed, the fluid builds up, we get the backup, bacteria and viruses and fungals, favorite friend, sitting right there in the ear. Same thing, we could talk about the same thing with the lungs, same thing with the sinuses, the congestion stuff. You guys, the same type of systems all over the body, they're supposed to drain. There's a inborn system that's supposed to drain each of these different areas of the body, but when they aren't doing that, then we're set up for failure. Okay, well, let's go even further back. Why aren't they draining? What is going on in our kids? You know, you look at your kid compared to another kid, you're like, that kid's never had an ear infection, mine's had 17. What is going on? Why did my kid not drain, right? Okay, so let's look at that draining issue. What causes things to drain? This is where we're going to get into that neuroimmune system. So the nervous system is that master controller of the body that's going to be doing these signaling, that's going to take the signal to the brain interprets, send that signal back, let's open, let's drain, right? So when we don't have that clear communication, we don't have the nervous system on board, we're going to run into these problems. And the number one cause of this is going to be an overactive sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic is our fight or flight, our stress side of our system. This is our go survival side. On the converse of that, we have our parasympathetic. This is our brake pedal, our rest and digest, heal, immune system side of things, okay? So the healing side and the stress side, they can't run at the same time. So if our kid is stuck on stress, they're wired for stress, they're gonna be over here running on the stress side, just survive all the time. They're never gonna take a pause to go over here, turn on that immune system side of it. Hey, we're full, turn on that resting side of it. Hey, ears are full, let's open and drain. Chest is full, let's get that drained out. They're not gonna go over and do those things. All right, let's go even further back. Why is my kid stuck on stress? Guys, we call this the perfect storm sequence. I see this over and over again in my office. It's this predictable sequence of stress that kids go through, stress early and often, that leads to our kids being stuck on sympathetic, being stuck on stress. It starts with stress during pregnancy, then we go into traumatic birth intervention. So many of these kids, they had a forceps, vacuum, C-section, cord wrap birth. Really is going to contribute to these issues. Then we start getting into breastfeeding difficulties, maybe latching problems, maybe we had some colic, some reflux, torticollis. Then we start getting into delayed milestones. Then we start getting into these ear infections. Then we start getting into tantrums and meltdowns, behavioral issues. And the list just trickles on and on and on. We can keep going all the way up through grade kids, right? Grade school kids. And so we see this predictable sequence of stress early and often leads to sympathetic overdrive. Sympathetic overdrive leads to inhibition of parasympathetic, which is where our immune system lives. Guys, it's this trickle-down effect. It's this same neurology all the way through that's causing all these problems. But when we get down to the real root of it, it's this stress. It's this stress early and often. It's the immune system signaling. It's the immune system. I'm blaming the immune system this morning, guys. Or the nervous system. It's a nervous system not doing its job. It's doing its job, but it's wired to do the job for stress. It's not wired to do the job for healing. So really, when we look at this in the long-term picture too, when we have somebody, a kid wired for stress, we're going to see delays. We're going to see motor delays, speech delays. We're going to see discoordination. We're going to see problems with behaviors, meltdowns, because they're stuck over here in the impulsive side of things. They're not doing the learning side of things. And I've got lots of other videos about this. I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole today because I really want to stick with ear infections, because we see this setup in the nervous system. And when we're stuck on stress, we're also stuck on pro-inflammatory. Sympathetic is a pro-inflammatory state. So when we're stuck on that, we're also causing more inflammation. Throw in on top of that dyes and dairy and gluten and all this other stuff, all the other stress and environmental toxins, everything else they're going to run into, and medications. That's going to just increase this inflammation, increase this mucus production too. So when we are working with these kiddos, getting down to that immune system core of this, nervous system core of all of this is so important. And so if you want to know more, about the overuse of antibiotics, the dangers of antibiotics, any of that, I've got a great article. It's going to be linked up here in the caption on my bio on Instagram. It's going to take you to an amazing article that talks about more about antibiotics, the dangers, the long-term use, and other things that you can do. If you are thinking, hey, I'm on the other side of this and we're not struggling with repeat ear infections, we did, but now we're struggling with more of the sensory spectrum, ADHD types of things, there's also links in there to articles about those too, so you can learn more. So if you have questions, send us a DM, comment below, share this with your friends and family who need to hear this, and we are absolutely waiting here for you with hope, help, and answers.